How could 60,000 of Ukraine's most capable troops simply disappear within 48 hours? This question stunned not only military analysts, but political leaders, civilians, and even seasoned soldiers around the globe. The sheer scale and speed of the collapse seemed to defy the logic of modern warfare, challenging everything that had been assumed about the resilience of fortified lines, the effectiveness of technology, and the reliability of human judgment under fire. The Kharkov lines were believed impregnable: fortified trenches, layers of minefields, and garrisons manned by elite brigades. Western satellites monitored every kilometer. Analysts watched for the faintest sign of movement. To outside observers, the front was a near-vertical wall, a bulwark forged through years of costly attrition and hard-won tactical adaptation. In the history of warfare, such confidence in fixed positions has often proved illusory. Think of the French reliance on the Maginot Line in 1939, a vast network of bunkers and guns that, while impressive on paper, could not withstand the German blitzkrieg that simply flowed around its edges. In Kharkov, the same belief in static strength set the stage for disaster. And then, in less than 2 days, that wall crumbled. Entire battalions were swallowed. Outposts that had held for months surrendered by dawn. Soldiers who believed themselves safe awoke to find enemy armor behind them, their communications silent, their escape routes gone. The suddenness of the collapse was reminiscent of the encirclements at Kiev and Vyazma during the Second World War, where Soviet and German forces alternately found themselves caught in vast, inescapable pockets. The world stared, uncomprehending. This was not a slow retreat, but the sudden erasure of a fighting force. The image of Ukrainian resilience, forged through years of war and countless sacrifices, shattered almost overnight, leaving allies and adversaries alike grasping for answers. The psychological shockwaves echoed far beyond the battlefield, unsettling strategic calculations in capitals from Washington to Moscow, from Berlin to Beijing. Was it sheer Russian firepower, a masterstroke of deception, or did a deeper rot undermine the defense from within? If we fail to grasp the true roots of this collapse, be they technological, organizational, or psychological, we risk repeating the same mistakes, with even higher costs next time. The lessons of Kharkov, if ignored, could become the blueprint for future disasters. To truly understand how Kharkov's defenses fell so quickly, we must rewind to the night before the disaster and dissect the assumptions, decisions, and vulnerabilities that set the trap, long before the first shot was fired. This analysis requires peeling back layers of complacency, examining not only the material state of the defenses, but also the structures of command and the culture of military thought that defined Ukrainian strategy. To uncover the hidden flaws, we must trace the hours and choices that doomed the front. The answers begin in the shadowed command posts and anxious trenches of October's final days. Here, the seeds of defeat were sown quietly, beneath the confident chatter of staff officers and the flicker of screens displaying satellite feeds. Appearances masked danger. Beneath the surface, the Kharkov front bristled with hidden flaws. On paper, Ukrainian defenses seemed formidable. Networks of trenches, bunkers, and anti-tank barriers stretched for kilometers, mapping an image of strength. Soldiers and engineers crowded the forward lines, but this apparent depth was an illusion. Just behind, the operational rear, where true resilience should have been layered, lay disturbingly bare. There were no fallback trenches, no secondary fortifications, no well-prepared redoubts to slow a major breach. This vulnerability deepened because Ukrainian reserves were spent. Bitter fighting across the broader front had left units depleted, scattered, and thinly manned. When pressure mounted, dispatching reinforcements took precious hours, sometimes even days, time that, in a crisis, simply did not exist. This echoes the failure of the Soviet reserves at the Battle of Kursk, where delayed counterattacks allowed German spearheads to penetrate dangerously deep before being blunted, at enormous cost. Another, subtler weakness crept in through command and control. High Command centralized all decisions, depending on satellite-based communications for rapid, real-time orders. In theory, this enabled swift reaction. In reality, a single targeted electronic warfare strike could sever these links, blinding and isolating frontline leaders at the worst possible moment. This over-centralization resembled the Soviet command style during the early stages of Operation Barbarossa in 1941, where frontline units often waited for permission from distant headquarters, only to find their orders arriving too late. Meanwhile, Russian forces worked in silence. Two strike groups massed quietly behind a curtain of deception. Russian planners orchestrated false signals, feigned buildups along other sectors, and enforced absolute radio silence where the real blow would fall. Ukrainian intelligence, comforted by Western satellite feeds, saw only fragmented troop movements, never the true storm forming in the shadows. This was operational maskirovka in its purest form, a doctrine with roots stretching back to the Red Army's finest hours, now updated with modern technology. This became a classic case of strategic overconfidence. Ukrainian command leaned heavily on outside assessments, convinced that their security was unbreakable. Critical gaps remained unguarded, risks underestimated. The danger was simple but catastrophic. Trust too much in perfect intelligence, and disaster arrives before anyone can react. In military history, the notion that technological superiority or perfect information can render one invulnerable has often been the prelude to catastrophe, as seen in the Israeli experience during the early days of the Yom Kippur War. Yet these factors alone do not fully explain why a sturdy front unraveled in mere days. What precise spark set off the chain reaction of collapse? To understand the unraveling, we must trace the first cracks, where deception met exhaustion, and where one false signal set everything in motion. At precisely 5 o'clock in the morning, the battlefield erupted. Every vulnerability was laid bare as the first Russian salvos tore through the dawn, thunderous, relentless, and more than just noise. Artillery roared across the horizon while thermobaric barrages seared the earth, igniting both soil and nerves. Within minutes, dense waves of electronic interference smothered Ukrainian radios and command networks. Units lost direction and cohesion before they could even assess what was hitting them. Russian commanders had sculpted this moment for weeks, hiding their intentions beneath layers of misdirection. When the assault began, it was not merely firepower, but a choreography of speed and deception. Assault battalions surged forward, shielded by tanks and special forces, while swarms of drones mapped each fracture and gap. Rather than smashing headlong into every strongpoint, Russian columns wove through chaos, bypassing resistance and isolating defenders in pockets, marked for later destruction. This maneuver warfare, reminiscent of the German panzers in France in 1940, turned static lines into traps. Ukrainian command, blindsided and overconfident, found itself deaf and paralyzed. Orders vanished into silence, aimed at units already scattered or erased. With communications jammed and leadership splintered, the very structure of defense dissolved. Their dependency on centralized control and satellite-reliant systems became fatal. No counterattack could take shape, and scattered reinforcements arrived too late to matter. Amid the turmoil, Russian air power and land forces moved with terrifying unity. Attack helicopters and low-flying jets struck at will, obliterating armored vehicles and command posts, hunting any sign of movement. The sky was uncontested. Russian pilots owned it, and with it, the initiative. Ukrainian soldiers on the ground could only guess at the size and direction of the assault as their lines buckled and broke. This is reminiscent of the First Gulf War, where control of the air allowed coalition forces to dismantle Iraqi defenses at will. In less than 4 hours, the entire tactical zone of defense was breached. Mobile echelons, armored columns, and rapid infantry flooded into the opening, racing past static resistance. Their orders were ruthless. Avoid getting bogged down, drive deep into the exposed rear areas. What started as a struggle for the front line became a headlong plunge into the operational heartland. Ukrainian defenses, no matter their preparation or sheer numbers, had been designed for a battle that simply did not happen. This is the brutal lesson of Kharkov. Speed, coordination, and the merciless exploitation of surprise can shatter even the strongest positions. In modern warfare, failing to adapt is not just a mistake. It is the start of total collapse, where every lost second multiplies the catastrophe. The collapse of the Iraqi army in Mosul in 2014 offers a parallel, where rapid Islamic State advances, aided by surprise and local intelligence, led to the disintegration of a force that seemed strong on paper. With the front in ruins and Russian columns surging forward, the next few hours would determine the fate of tens of thousands, and whether any escape or defense remained possible against the oncoming tide. But even as the Ukrainian defense unraveled, isolated groups of soldiers refused to yield. Somewhere in the chaos, seeds of resistance began to form, desperate, uncertain, but not yet extinguished. Stories emerged of small units holding crossroads, engineers laying hasty mines, and junior officers rallying their men for last-ditch stands. These acts of valor, while not enough to stem the tide, would become legends of endurance and sacrifice, echoing the stand of the Polish defenders at Westerplatte or the surrounded Americans at Bastogne. Encirclement is more than a battlefield defeat. It is a strategic death sentence whose consequences resound far beyond the immediate clash of arms. The isolation of entire formations has been the doom of armies from Cannae to Stalingrad, always leading to cascading effects on morale and strategy. As Russian units surged forward, their objective was unambiguous: advance to the Oskol River and sever every Ukrainian route of retreat and supply. Tank battalions and mechanized brigades bypassed scattered resistance, racing down routes mapped by weeks of reconnaissance. With each passing hour, the noose tightened, escape corridors dwindling as defenders found themselves pressed into an ever-shrinking pocket. By now, Russian control of the air was decisive. Attack aircraft and helicopters swept not only the front, but deep into Ukrainian territory, targeting bridges, rail yards, and convoys. Roadways vanished under fire, bridges crumbled, and supply lines were shredded. The battlefield became an island, cut off so thoroughly that even distant reserves could not hope to break through. Each destroyed bridge and burning convoy pushed the encirclement closer to its grim conclusion. Within less than a week, over 60,000 Ukrainian soldiers, the core of Kiev's Kharkov force, were sealed inside. The so-called Kharkov cauldron snapped shut with cold, deliberate precision. Attempts to break out were frantic but chaotic, met by overwhelming artillery and swift armored counterattacks. Dozens of columns ended as twisted wrecks along ruined roads. In this, history repeated itself. At Falaise in 1944, Allied forces closed the pocket on German troops, who suffered devastating losses trying to escape. Panic rippled through the pocket. Soldiers realized there would be no relief. Communications faltered, and command structures disintegrated. Morale, already battered by constant bombardment, collapsed. Some units made desperate dashes through minefields. Others surrendered en masse. Scenes of chaos and capitulation swept through the encirclement. Yet the material losses were even more devastating than the human tragedy. Elite Ukrainian formations, painstakingly built and equipped over years, were gutted. Hundreds of Western-supplied armored vehicles, artillery systems, and advanced air defenses were destroyed or captured within days. The backbone of the Ukrainian army was shattered, leaving the entire force reeling. This mirrors the loss of the French First Army in 1940, when the rapid collapse of the Meuse front led to the encirclement and destruction of France's best units. The consequences radiated far beyond the loss of territory. The destruction of experienced troops and irreplaceable equipment shifted not only the tactical situation, but the whole strategic balance of the conflict. Confidence crumbled, within the army, throughout political circles, and across society itself. Ukrainian command came to a grim realization. The cost of miscalculation was not just ground lost, but a devastating erosion of capability, morale, and public trust. The echoes of the Kharkov cauldron would haunt Ukrainian strategy for months to come. In its aftermath, analysts would dissect the operation for lessons and warnings for future conflicts. Military academies around the world would pore over satellite images, radio intercepts, and after-action reports, searching for clues to avoid similar disasters. Was it mere firepower that doomed Kharkov, or did something deeper, an unseen rot, decide its fate? The answer lies in a careful examination of both tangible failures and intangible weaknesses. Beneath the thunder of artillery and the steel tide of tanks, a harsher truth emerges. Ukrainian command was not simply outgunned, they were outmaneuvered, outpaced, and repeatedly outthought. Overconfidence, rooted in rigid doctrine and misplaced trust in foreign intelligence, became their undoing. Instead of questioning assumptions or adapting to the chaos of the modern front, commanders clung to familiar patterns, blind to the shifting reality. The fog of war thickened as Ukrainian analysts dismissed mounting warning signs. Enemy buildups and subtle Russian feints were brushed aside as distractions. Faulty intelligence, paired with centralized and inflexible command, left Ukrainian defenders slow to react and easy to surprise. In modern war, information is ammunition, and every signal missed became another shot fired against them. The failure to recognize the impending disaster was reminiscent of the Soviet misreading of German preparations before Operation Citadel. The most devastating failure, however, was technological. Despite painful lessons from recent years, Ukrainian defense remained anchored in an era before drones, precision munitions, and relentless electronic warfare became decisive. Russian forces, by contrast, fused real-time drone reconnaissance, electronic jamming, and rapid-fire strikes into a devastating whole. The time from detection to destruction shrank from hours to mere minutes, erasing the defender's margin for error. The importance of integrating technology in warfare is a lesson that echoes the transformation seen in Operation Desert Storm, where precision and information overwhelmed traditional defenses. Flexibility drew the line between survival and defeat. Russian units maneuvered with deception and speed, feinting in one sector while massing for breakthroughs elsewhere. Commanders at every level were trusted to seize fleeting chances. In stark contrast, the Ukrainian system's rigidity turned strong points into traps, unable to reposition, reinforce, or retreat before the blow fell. This was the difference between an organization that empowers initiative and one that demands obedience above all. The fall of Kharkov was not simply a matter of numbers or brute force. It stands as a warning from the future. In 21st century warfare, adaptation, speed, and technological integration are the true arbiters of survival. Static defenses, no matter how well built, crumble before an enemy that blends new tools with operational artistry. The world saw a similar lesson in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict of 2020, where the effective use of drones and rapid maneuver rendered traditional fortifications obsolete. Ignore these lessons at your peril. The collapse at Kharkov is more than a caution for generals. It is a warning for any nation clinging to outdated doctrine, inflexible command, or complacency about technological change. The very security, and perhaps the future of nations, depends on learning and evolving faster than those who would undo them. So what does this mean for those shaping defense policy, or for everyday citizens who trust in their nation's safety? The answers ripple far beyond the battlefield. For policymakers, it is a call to embrace flexible command structures, invest in layered and resilient defenses, and foster a culture of innovation that prizes adaptation over dogma. For citizens, it is a reminder that security is never guaranteed and that vigilance and investment in the future are the only true safeguards. What unfolded in Kharkov was not an isolated disaster. It signals a turning point. The world must now ask what comes next, on the front lines, and in the minds of those who lead. In the aftermath, Ukrainian units began to rebuild, but the lessons of collapse hung over every decision. International partners debated how best to support, and adversaries studied the operation for their own purposes. History's judgment is harshest for those who cling to the certainties of yesterday. The collapse at Kharkov was not the result of diminished courage or sheer enemy numbers. It was the consequence of fixed assumptions about technology, doctrine, and the very character of war, while the world outside those assumptions shifted, quietly and inexorably. Military defeat is always cruel, but what happened in late October of 2025 cut deeper. This was more than a lost battle. It was a systemic disintegration. Overconfidence, blind adherence to familiar procedures, and a fatal misreading of both enemy intent and capability set the stage. Ukrainian command put faith in their layered defensive lines, believing that Western intelligence and entrenched positions would suffice. The Kharkiv front, however, revealed hard truths. Static defenses gave scant protection when depth was ignored, reserves were stretched thin, and command depended on brittle, centralized communication. Russian forces did not simply breach the lines. They shattered the foundational belief that wars are won by merely holding ground and counting battalions. They weaponized uncertainty, using deception, speed, and the relentless integration of arms to turn every expectation into a liability. Sudden technological superiority transformed the battlefield. Drones, swarming ahead of armored columns, mapped and guided the assault. Electronic warfare jammed orders before they could reach cut-off units. Air and ground forces moved together, almost as a single organism, probing for every weakness, bypassing strong points, isolating defenders. Within hours, defensive cohesion dissolved into chaos. The world looked on as a system built over years, shaped by doctrine, foreign assistance, and faith in established methods, was unraveled in less than one day. The implications reach far beyond Kharkiv's ruined outskirts. In this era, information moves faster than tanks. A single vulnerable node can paralyze an entire front. The lesson is merciless. Adapt or perish. Cling to tradition and risk irrelevance. For any nation, the cost of failing to learn from Kharkiv is not just a distant defeat. It is the collapse of institutions, the loss of lives, and the erosion of public trust. The stakes are existential. In a world where technological and strategic change outpaces habit, security is earned not by size or history, but by humility, foresight, and the courage to question every assumption. As Kharkiv slips from the headlines, its warning grows sharper. The greatest danger is not the enemy's firepower, but our own certainty. Only those who relentlessly adapt, who invest in resilience and challenge their own beliefs, can hope to survive the battles of tomorrow. Practical steps emerge from this tragedy, and they are as urgent as they are clear. First, militaries must develop decentralized command structures that empower junior leaders to make decisions in real time, even when cut off from senior headquarters. The German concept of Auftragstaktik, mission-type orders, can serve as a model where initiative and flexibility are valued over slavish adherence to plan. Second, technological integration must be prioritized. Training and doctrine should focus not only on using new tools like drones and electronic warfare systems, but also on defending against them. Exercises should simulate communications loss, GPS denial, and the sudden appearance of enemy breakthroughs to inoculate units against panic and paralysis. Third, resilience must be built into defense lines, not only in the form of physical depth, but also through rehearsed withdrawal plans, distributed supply caches, and fallback positions. The Israeli army's layered defense in the Golan during the Yom Kippur War, which bought crucial time for reserves to arrive, offers a valuable example. Fourth, intelligence analysis must be subjected to constant skepticism and red teaming. Assumptions should be challenged, and wargaming should include the possibility of deception and surprise. The American failure to anticipate the Tet Offensive in Vietnam, despite overwhelming intelligence resources, underscores the perils of confirmation bias. Finally, the culture of military and civilian leadership must reward adaptation, not just obedience. After the shock of the German Ardennes offensive in 1944, Allied commanders learned to improvise, respond rapidly, and trust local initiative. The same spirit must animate any force that hopes to survive in the 21st century battlespace. In closing, the fall of Kharkiv is not just a story of loss, but a call to action. It is a warning shot across the bow of every nation that believes yesterday's methods can win tomorrow's wars. The question is not whether another Kharkov-style collapse could happen again, but whether we will have the wisdom, humility, and courage to prevent it. The wall did not fall because it was stormed. It fell because it was hollow, because its defenders believed too much in its strength and too little in their own capacity to adapt. The future belongs not to those who build the tallest walls, but to those who learn to rebuild faster, smarter, and together. The lessons of Kharkov are written in the costliest ink, the blood of the brave, the hopes of a nation, and the warning that the only constant in war is change. Let us not look away. Instead, let us learn, adapt, and ensure that the next time disaster strikes, we are ready not only to survive, but to prevail.